So welcome back. We look forward to begin this week the second chapter of Yud Tes Kislev, literally translated, the Holy Epistle of the Alter Rebbe. In this segment, there's 32 letters, 32 epistles. This is the fourth segment of Tanya. We spoke about this in the past, that the Tanya is comprised of 5. It actually corresponds to the Chamisha Chumshe Torah. This Tanya is known to be called the Torah Shebiksav of Yud Tes Kislev, the written Torah of Yud Tes Kislev. Again, we spoke about this in the past. Of course, it needs an explanation. This is the foundation of Yud Tes Kislev, is the Tanya, of course. So the Yud Tes Kislev is a bit distinct of the previous segments, which we merited to conclude, the Likutei Amorim and Sharich V'Emunah and Yud Tes Tshuva, this being the fourth, but of course it's distinct because it's letters, and every letter was written separately. There's no sequence from one letter to the other, even though there is a common thread we spoke about in the past. There's definitely you can glean from the entire Yud Tes Kislev Alter Rebbe's approach to the whole mitzvah of tzedakah, which he was supporting the famous Aliyah of Rebbe Mendel Haradaka and Chassidim, which we're going through a very difficult time in that experience. But generally, it gives us a whole different approach of this mitzvah of tzedakah. You learn Yud Tes Kislev. It's a game changer. It's a mind changer of this whole mitzvah, which is the most important mitzvah in from a certain perspective and point of view. Of course, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, but tzedakah as a mitzvah, Rebbe himself explains it with his inimitable explanation in Perek Lamed Zayin Likutei Amorim. It's a click away. You can see how the Alter Rebbe establishes why this tzedakah in general is the most important mitzvah of all mitzvahs. Once focusing on what the mitzvahs are supposed to accomplish, tzedakah, giving tzedakah, accomplished that many folds over again. You can see it in Perek Lamed Zayin of Likutei Amorim, the first segment. So you can see, definitely you can say that the common thread between all, but not necessarily. For example, the previous chapter, you didn't have it in this chapter as well. You don't have, Alter Rebbe is not underscoring particularly the mitzvah tzedakah, but in the overall, you have 32 Yud Tes Kislev, 32 epistles. So you can say most of them. You could say what you can glean in general. Where is the fundamental, or where is the transformative? What mitzvah is so to say the transformative appreciation of a one mitzvah? You can say it's definitely mitzvah tzedakah throughout the entire 32 Geras of the Alter Rebbe. But nonetheless, like I say, the previous segments, it was Likutei Amorim, 53 chapters. Of course, it deals with different subjects, but it's a continuum. It's every chapter is basically it's written in sequence, even though it deals with different components, because there in our Avodas Hashem, because there are different components in our Avodas Hashem, in our service to our Creator. But nonetheless, it's 53 chapters, written one following the other, or as Alter Rebbe established that it should be written as a sequence. So too, of course, Sharich V'Emunah, Yud Tes Tshuva. This is different, understandably. These are letters written in different times and for different opportunities with different messages. Today's Yud Tes, which is the second, is, as you see, if you're looking in the original text, page 206, you can see and find in the corresponding English text, which elaborates a bit more on this. It's Acher Bios Mi Peterburg, after he came back from St. Petersburg. Why was Alter Rebbe in St. Petersburg? So this is also something which is known, and everybody's well aware that Alter Rebbe was imprisoned. Basically, somebody who strengthened Yiddishkeit and lifted up a generation, if you will, in this unique, yes, an inimitable way. The Alter Rebbe, which is spoke about this in the past, and the Neshama Chadasha came down to this world and started opening up the windows into the reality of Yemei Mashiach, which Yemei Mashiach is about V'yadaita Hayim. It's a pasuk in Torah, but look, you see in the end of Rambam, what is it going to be? Azman lo yoseh kol hayom kol das Hashem, to know Hashem, not to believe. And it's beyond, of course, the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu this is what we're here for. Ani nivreisi l'shamish eskei. I'm here to serve my Creator, but this is what Yemei Mashiach is going to enrich that service because we'll have a vast, comprehensive knowledge of the reality of God, which of course in time of Gullus we're so missing out on it. As the Rambam again, he speaks about the last two chapters, the last two chapters in the whole Mishnah Torah, which is the magnum opus of the Rambam. The final halach, the final two chapters, speaks about Yemesa Mashiach and tells us what Mashiach is all about, what's the persona of Mashiach, who is Mashiach, what are we looking for to establish this is Mashiach. It's good to learn it time and again. So a lot of confusions, so to say, dissipate just by learning this last two chapters time and again, among other shiurim in Torah, of course. So the Rambam writes in the end about what is the whole point of Yemesa Mashiach, Hashem, to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a human being should be able to have knowledge in the Ein Sof. It's an oxymoron on its own. It's oxymoronic. What does it mean? A human being, a finite human being, has a knowledge, an infinite creator? It doesn't make sense, but that's the gift of Yemesa Mashiach, that Hashem opens up the window and shares with us, of course, Kifi Koyach Adam, an interesting lashon of the Rambam there, the idea of Hasaga, perception of the Das of Beida, the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, clarity, and a conspicuous appreciation of the Beida Elam of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So the Alter Rebbe is in Neshama Chadasha, just coming before as an intro into the Yemesa Mashiach. Hashem sends down the Neshama to open up Chochmah Bina Das. It's called Chabad Pashat. Simply, the Alter Rebbe wasn't here just to share information. The Alter Rebbe's information was about transformation, because once you understand it with your cognitive faculties, like anything else in life, and you hear something, it hovers over you. Yeah, it makes an imprint and it makes an impact, but where is that transformative experience is if you appreciate it and you understand it and you perceive it thoroughly. And so too, in the matters, Alter Rebbe took the deepest concepts of godliness and the godly reality, the way it's conveyed in our Torah, and brought it down in a way of Chochmah Bina Das, Chabad. That's why it's called Chabad, Alter Rebbe. That was the idea of the Alter Rebbe, that our minds should be able to appreciate it and understand it and internalize the message, and that, of course, becomes a very person. It is indeed a transformative experience. A person who learns Chassidus is a different type of person. So this Alter Rebbe began this dissemination of Chassidus Chabad, of course, together with the whole package of Avodas Hashem. And we say package of Avodas like no one else, as we mentioned before earlier. The Tanya itself is a perfect manual to Avodas Hashem. Alter Rebbe showed a Yid how he could serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his entire life with simcha v'tuv libo, with joy and gladness of heart. It's grand. It's grand what Alter Rebbe did, even in every mitzvah, in every limdat Torah. The whole approach it's on its own. Even the information of the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Amorim pertaining our Avodas Hashem is it's a game changer. It's a total game changer. And Alter Rebbe's Nigla, who could we compare the Alter Rebbe to? The Rav Shulchan Aruch, one of the greatest Ga'inim of all times. You could easily say that one of the greatest Ga'inim of all times, the Rambam, the famous Rogatchover, used to say that Tzveiham gekent lernen, the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, now, not to take it out of context, from what part of history was he talking about? We have Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, but we have Rabbi Akiva. He wasn't just, of course, he was talking about the latter few centuries. The Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Akiva, they were establishing Torah, but as Torah gained its entire formation, he was, referring to all the myriads, tens of thousands of Ga'inei Elam which existed in the last few centuries. And of course, he knew exactly how much they all knew how to learn, but he always found something very unique of the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe, not to take the Rogatchover, which is again, it was say the Rogatchover, one of the greatest Ga'inim. This is a mind like the Rogatchover, nor do I have an understanding how things exactly work, but just repeating to say like a mind like the Rogatchover, especially a Torah mind, comes down once in 1,000 years, which is quoted in a few places. I've seen it. The accuracy of it, it's irrelevant. The idea was he was the Rogatchover, a Sara, emes Sara HaTorah, a true Sara HaTorah. So he pointed out of the uniqueness of the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was the Go'in HaGo'inim, the greatest Go'in of all times, the Nigla Torah, the revealed part of Torah. Look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, look at Kuntre Sachin. I mean, who am I to Bechlal even talk about the Alter Rebbe's greatness in learning Torah and learning Torah? So the Alter Rebbe guided Chassidim, established the Chassidus Chabad, and unfortunately, there was those from within even the Jewish and from community which were instrumental in slandering to the government, the Tsarist government, messages against the Alter Rebbe. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole history of it because it's not a secret, and more so, it's known to all. It's known to all. This is the Yud Tes Kislev, the Yud Kislev, the whole every from a Yid and beyond knows what Yud Tes Kislev, the day of the liberation of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was emancipated from these days in prison. Actually, he sat 53 days in prison, which actually corresponds to the 53 chapters in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe says in the Schus of Yidden, toiling in Tanya 2 years. The Tanya was published 2 years before the Alter Rebbe was incarcerated, and the Alter Rebbe says in the Schus of the 2 years, there was the great victory, but also the 53 days, because, for that matter, as it says in other places, on high there was this kitrug. The Alter Rebbe, you think about the tzad, the side which is supposed to persuade the Yid away from the Derech Hashem, would be called, let's say, the Yetzer Hara. The Alter Rebbe writes this perfect manual in Avodas Hashem, which becomes a game changer, how to deal with our evil inclinations, any way you want to call the Yetzer Hara. And it's something, like I said, it's unparalleled to any other sefer, which made an unparalleled impact on human beings, Yidden, with the Yetzer Hara. So how does the Yetzer Hara feel about it on high? How do the negative, they feel that there's an imbalance, which is supposed to be ubacharta b'chaim, you have to choose, there has to be an equal balance. And somewhat, there's a lack of equilibrium on high, and it says that's where there was a kitrug on high over the Alter Rebbe. Together with the fact that it was all godly mandated, but it doesn't always go through simple. Like, you want to accomplish something big, there's always different prevent. The greater the thing you want to accomplish, there's always greater the preventions, the challenges. There are, in this case, there was the challenges on high, which eventually led on below in this world, in this plane. Alter Rebbe was incarcerated as such. For that matter, that's why he said the 53 chapters, which he revealed, that's how many days he was incarcerated. Precisely, exactly 53 chapters. Together with that, he said that he was zeichet to such a great victory because of the Chassidim toiling those 2 years in the Sefer Tanya, which is not only not a contradiction, this is the way it is. It's a great, and not only one of the greatest accomplishments, the breakthrough, starting from the Baal Shem Tov, of course, but Alter Rebbe's unique breakthrough in Chassidus Chabad, which means the attachment, the connection, this greatest, loftiest information with exist in the esoteric part of Torah, and to generalize that the godly reality, to be able to enter and to become one, meaning to say to truly connect with pnimis, which means the true connection, intrinsic connection with the human mind, the human cognitive faculties, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. This is stupendous. It was one of and this is the window eventually which will give us, again, a foretaste of Yemais HaMashiach, and subsequently all the Rebbeim with the thousands of discourses which they wrote, all bringing the godly reality down to Olam Hazeh, which is again part of the Dira B'Tachtenim, making Hashem a dwelling place, a domicile in this very physical world. Again, this is all revolutionary accomplishments. It was great challenges on high, and then consequently challenges below. unfortunately, who was instrumental below to bring the government in, which had the authority, of course, to arrest Alter Rebbe, it was from much of the Frumme community, the religious community. Now, how can we understand that? How can we comprehend such a reality? Yeah, it's pretty much incomprehensible. How could that be? People would be from would think of orchestrating something to lead to an arrest of even any Yid, especially a great Yid, especially one of the greatest Yidden of all times, the Alter Rebbe. It doesn't make sense. But yet, this was a beginning. I of course it doesn't make sense. Now I'm not going to try to make sense of it, but we're not going to go into it right now. But the Alter Rebbe is somewhat alluding, and now the Alter Rebbe has this great victory, Yud Tes Kislev. He's coming back from Petersburg, and it was a great victory because not only they just let him free, they realized over all this time of his imprisonment that this is not a regular person, this is a godly person. And when they let him free, it was with the greatest dignity and the greatest honor. And they even gave him the Ezrach Nichbad L'Dereisa, the Schneerson family eventually. Of course, the communists came, they threw everything over. It was considered, from the time the Alter Rebbe left Petersburg, at that very time, a Ezrachim Nichbadim L'Derotam, which means Ezrach Nichbad L'Dereisa, an honorable citizen. And Alter Rebbe and eventually his children, even though they also had the issues with the Tsar's government, is issues again with those who wanted to again tip the scale or tip the success of the Limud HaTorah of Chassidus and so on. Not to go into it now, but in the overall, the Alter Rebbe left, starting the Alter Rebbe's liberation from prison was in a very dignified, a very honorable manner, and they themselves, Alter Rebbe famously wrote to the Rebbe Yitzchak Berditchever, how they themselves recognized the greatness of God, godliness is holy Torah. Of course, he didn't focus about himself, but in the end of the day, how he brought about this enormous Kiddush Hashem, that they understood that this is somebody of great stature, holy stature, and the way again he was liberated was in a very, very again dignified and honorable manner. It was not stame freedom, a liberation. You sat in prison, now you're free. It was a great victory for the Alter Rebbe. There's a whole history, of course. The Alter Rebbe sitting in prison, and the ministers who came to visit him, to scrutinize him, and that's where they glean, whoa, this is not somebody who belongs here, and not somebody who did anything wrong, and not only that, he is a great holy person. That's why, again, this is, you see the Alter Rebbe's famous letter to the Rebbe. Everything is documented today. It's a click away today for sure. Today you can read all about it. So this letter was written Achram B'Yosim in Petersburg, once he came from St. Petersburg, in the spirit of his as he was released from this imprisonment. So again, it's whatever I just even mentioned over here in the backdrop of this letter. There's written in many folds and quantity of writing and the quality of the information, the accuracy of the information of what took place at that time. You could find it today. Today it's really a click away. So the Alter Rebbe begins with a famous pasuk of Yaakov Avinu, which when Yaakov Avinu was at the time when Hashem gave him these enormous brachas, he began just with a stick, without anything, especially for the story which the Torah tells us about how the little bitty he had, Eliphaz, took that away from him, and that's where he began, so impoverished, so vulnerable, and he began his journey to Choron, but eventually Hashem turned everything around for Yaakov. He was an Ish Matzliach, somebody who had success in everything that he did, and eventually he gained wealth, he gained riches, he gained avodim ushvachas, maids, and it was all of course all part of the extension of Yaakov's wealth, a beautiful family, the Shiftei Ka, the 12 tribes, Mitase Shlema, even more than Avram and Yitzchak, which one had Yishmael and Esav. This was a full package that Hashem blessed Yaakov with, and it manifested. It came to full fruition, and now he is countered by Esav. He's challenged by Esav. So he turns to Hashem. He says, "Kotainti, I feel so humble and small. Mikol ha'chasadim, mikol ha'emes, from all the kindness of mikol ha'emes, which is again chulu, etc. From everything you've done to me." And he didn't feel he has any merits even to be successful with this adversary, his adversary, which was unfortunately was his brother. Interesting, interesting. I'll tell you, brought this over here, that this pasuk, based on what we mentioned before, but focusing on Yaakov, he felt so humble. He said, "Look what Hashem gave me, such wealth and such success," and he didn't feel he has any merit right now to overcome this new challenge. And he even triumphed over Lavan, for that matter, his father-in-law, famous Laban, Lavan Arami, which tried to bring him down many, many times. But he triumphed over that. Now he's with this challenge. He didn't even feel he has any merits in his portfolio. As the Gemara explains, Rashi brings it down, the reason why he didn't even believe, he just asked Hashem, "Please, it's just because you told me, Ato Amarto, that I'm deserving," says Yaakov Avinu, "but you said I'm going to do good with you, and I will carry you forward to be the formal progenitor." Even Abraham was the progenitor of Am Yisrael, but with the Shvatim eventually to establish Am Yisrael. So please save me. But he himself felt that he doesn't have any merits in his basket, if you will. Which of course he did. He was Yaakov Avinu, a constant servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As a Lashon Zeir, a Merkava L'Lukus, obviously a Merkava, a chariot without any self-interest at all just a chariot for Hashem. We spoke about this many times. The rider of the chariot, wherever Hashem wanted to go and do and accomplish, the others were right there for them without any desire on their own. Of course, you're talking about Yaakov Avinu, but part of Yaakov Avinu, he was so humble, he didn't even feel he had any of these merits. So he says, "Kotainti, I'm humble, I'm small, from all the kindness," and he felt even the merits he did have, he was used up through the kindness which Hashem provided for him over the years in his mind. The idea of Hashem taking the points, that does exist. The Gemara says, "Ein simchen el hanes," you don't rely on miracles. If you rely on miracles, and Hashem has to intervene and make a miracle for you, at that point, if Hashem makes at the point, a big part of your points are taken away. Therefore, keep your points in your basket. Don't do anything drastic that Hashem needs to pull them out and reduce from your portfolio, if you will. Yaakov Avinu felt, even though he didn't look to do anything miracles, but he looked around him. He knew everything about him. His life was only miraculous, even though it took a lot of toil, with a lot of obstacles and much painful experiences, many obstacles and challenges. In Pshuta Shomikra, the simple wording of the pasuk, of the psukim, his challenge with Lavan, and with Rachel and Leah and so on, but he came to a point. He looked around. He said, "Wow, Hashem blessed me with such an overwhelming measure of blessings." He says, "Kotainti, I'm humbled from all this kindness, and I don't even think I'm deserving to be saved." But it's again, he said, "But Ato Amarto Eitiv Imach." You said, and please get it over the hump, and I should be able to be successful, which Hashem, of course, listened to him. And yet, besides the fact that Yaakov Avinu has many of his own merits, and he triumphed over Esav. So Alter Rebbe begins this epistle, this letter, following his return and his victory in Yud Tes Kislev, following his return from St. Petersburg, with this very pasuk, "Kotainti mikol hachasadim," small mikol hachasadim mikol hachasadim, Pirush. Alter Rebbe explains, "Shebachol chesed v'chesed she'Hakadosh Baruch Hu eisa la'adam," every kindness which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which Hashem does to the person, tzarich liyis shval ruach b'ma'id, he has to be humble, b'ma'id, very humble, which means that one should never think for a moment, Hashem gave me abundance of parnasa or abundance of success in other areas of life, maybe health and children and whatever the compilation of the composite of life, whatever is in the package of life in general, and the successes which Hashem provides to the Yid, to the human being, particularly to the Yid, to the Eved Hashem. All, these are brachas which establishes a blessed life. So when somebody sees and experiences a particular chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Hashem gets it right. I am such a great person. I am an Eved Hashem. I serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you know what I did then, and you know what I did then. And you remember what I did a few years ago, and so on. Hashem is getting it right, and it brings out a sensation of perhaps even haughtiness, pompousness, narcissism. Hashem is giving me chesed because I'm deserving of the chesed. The story I want to make. We did say the story. I believe when we began learning Likutei Amorim, Hillel Paritch, who was one of the famous chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, later became a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, the Post-Tanya, later became a chassid of the Mittel Rebbe, and also the Tzemach Tzedek, the successor of the Mittel Rebbe. So they asked him, and if you can tell us that of Hillel, you could read about Hillel Paritch. You could read and read and read. He was one of the greatest chassidim of all times, really. Again, we're not going into it right now. There's much written about Reb Hillel, but one of the things they asked him, in a nutshell, tell us the difference of your experience pre-Chassidus, or tell us the difference of your connection or the way you perceived Yiddishkeit yourself as a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, pre-Chassidus and post-Chassidus, pre-Tanya and post-Tanya. And kind of in a nutshell. So he answered, he said, in the very beginning, before I started learning Chassidus, and Hillel, of course, knew his greatness. The point of Anav is not that you don't know about your milas, it's important to know about one's advantages, one's virtues, because that's the way we are able to progress. If we just shun them, that we don't have anything to build on. Of course, one has to know their milas, and Onav, just I'm saying this tangentially, Onav doesn't mean, I'm nothing. Like we've mentioned a few times, that Moshe Rabbeinu had to go get the Torah. Despite Torah says that Moshe was the greatest Onav, the most humble person of all mankind. And not only in his generation, as the Torah Shabbat tells us, that it was referring to all generations. Does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, many examples in the 40 years of Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership, did he ever, let's say, Matan Torah, which was the connection of Hashem to Am Yisrael via the Torah? There, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Moshe Rabbeinu is part and parcel of this whole revelation, of this whole package of Torah. There always has to be a Moshe Rabbeinu. We spoke about this as well in the past. So does it mean, as an example, that Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was an Onav, probably when Hashem called Moshe to go up into the mountain, Moshe turned to the guy next to him, Yankel, and says, maybe you go up. It's not for me. I'm not deserving. Of course not. Moshe Rabbeinu knew exactly who he was, what his mandate was, and he knew that he was the one who was Eimei, like the Pasuk says, Beinechem le'en Hashem le'ekechem, between Hashem and Am Yisrael, but not, again, a divider, a separate entity, but Moshe is Tefillah Moshe Isha Lekim. He's an extension of the godly reality. Again, it's a pasuk in the whole medrash, all the medrashim, and Gemaras about Moshe Rabbeinu. So, of course, part of the avodah of the yid is not to be false, so to say. I'm not nothing. I don't have no. Person has to know their milas together with that. As an example of Moshe, despite Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest of all times, he was still able to be, or Torah still attests that he was the honor Mikol Adam Moshe Rabbeinu Adama, because it's not a contradiction. Moshe Rabbeinu felt maybe Hashem would give someone else, as it's explained, Hashem would give someone else these kaiches, this energy that he gave me, or this power that he gave me. Maybe he would have done different, maybe he would have done better than me. He always felt humble despite who he knew he was. Understandably, honor is not a chakran, as we need to say it boldly and blatantly. So Rabbi Hillel knew his qualities. He was a yadon in Torah, unprecedented even in his own generation. His knowledge in Torah, he was a goyin, nigla Torah, one way or another. Without pre-Chassidus, of course, he knew all parts of Torah. However, he said pre-Chassidus, he felt based on his stature and Avodas Hashem, how's Hashem going to deal with me after 120? What kind of Gan Eden is he going to be able to form for somebody on the stature of Rebbe Hillel, of course focusing on himself. And he had this problem, vacillating back and forth. Where is Hashem going to find such a, like a unique place for Rebbe Hillel? And what was my answer? Said Rebbe Hillel, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Kel Yochel. He is infinite. Don't worry about Hashem. Despite I can't make it out, but Hashem is a Kel Yochel. Kel Yochel is a terminology which means he has infinite powers. And therefore, he's going to work it out that there will be a perfect Gan Eden for Rebbe Hillel. Not to worry. Post-Chassidus continued Rebbe Hillel. The answer, this is what he gave the introduction. He gave it like in a kind of said a riddle, and he said not a riddle so to say, and he put in a few words, and he said, the difference before Chassidus and after Chassidus is the answer is the same, and the question is is different. But he said he packaged it. He says, you want to know the difference before Chassidus and after Chassidus? The answer is the same. The question just changes. Getting back to the latter, but I said post Chassidus, after Tanya, my question changed. That how is the Eibishter after 120 going to deal with such a despicable entity? And of course, he wasn't just shunning himself, the despicable guy. And he just meant to say, because we know Avodas Hashem is not just a certain checklist or a certain shackle. Avodas Hashem, it's every millisecond, every tenuah, and especially when it comes to the subtle faculties, vision, thoughts, what a person hears. You're talking about millisecond decisions. As we know, we don't have to elaborate. We know the package of Avodas Hashem, there's millions and millions of details can go into 24 hours. He wasn't just saying, the despicable guy. He just said, how is Hashem going to deal with me after 120? Such a lowly Betty, such a lowly creation. And it bothered him, he felt so insignificant post-Tanya, which again, the message of Tanya is it's about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the end of the day, it opens up a new light on the person himself. Of course, his challenges, and Chassidus helps the person navigate these challenges, but it gives, of course, a different perspective. The more the bittul, the nullification of everything in the face of Hashem, including myself, including the Yid, including even the Eved Hashem. Someone's spoken about this idea on its own, not for now. So he says, the question has changed, the answer is the same. The question is, how is Hashem going to deal with something so despicable as a Rebbe after 120? Where is he going to place him? How is he going to handle him? But the answer was the same. Hashem is a Kel Yochel. He'll know how to deal with Rebbe Hillel. He'll know what to do with him. He is infinite, not to worry. I'm saying the story over here because it fits, because sometimes we really start believing, if Hashem did this grand thing for me, and I saw it was so miraculous, and I saw it was so, it couldn't have been less than Hashem focusing in, and Hashem decided to bring you this grand bracha. And you can't even camouflage it. It just happened so and so. You see enormous bracha falling upon you in every area in life, and many times in the combination of all. You see, Hashem is getting it right. Remember what I did here. Remember what I did there. And just the fact that Hashem extends this blessing on you, extends this kindness on you, that itself makes the person a bit haughty and pompous. Finally, the radar is focusing on me, and I, and that's why Hashem gave me this great kindness. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says what we glean from the pasuk of Yaakov Avinu, who was greater than Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu was an Eved Hashem like no other Eved Hashem. That's what it says in Zayah. The Abbas were Merkavat Elokus, they didn't have any desires. It was only HaKadosh Baruch Hu riding on them, so to say, right? The famous Merkava, we spoke about this so many times. The chariot, when the rider comes in the chariot, it's not the chariot wants to go left and right. The chariot, I am in charge, you're going right because you're going straight or right, wherever I want you to go. That's most of this, that's a bit of our story a little bit. We don't only want to do, we just compel ourselves to do what Hashem wants. A chariot doesn't have that. Wherever the rider gets onto the chariot doesn't even have a desire to say, I want to go right or left, and therefore, nonetheless, you're in charge. I have to submit myself to you. No, on the onset, the chariot is just there, and just moves along wherever the rider wants it to go. Ovis hating a merkava. They were a merkava to HaKadosh Baruch Hashem. Kaviyachol said as being the rider, whatever Hashem wanted to accomplish in this world, they didn't have any other ratzon, any other desire, only fulfill Hashem's ratzon, desire. And Hashem blesses Yaakov Avinu, but Yaakov Avinu is at this juncture with Esau. He doesn't say, "Oh, I did this." He says, "Kotainti." He felt he doesn't even have any merits, because he felt small, precisely because of the Chesed. Precisely when Hashem placed on him this kindness, gave him this kindness and this abundance of wealth and abundance of bracha, that made Yaakov Avinu more and more kotainti, more humble in his eyes. And that's what he says. Because chesed because chesed is the right arm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, metaphorically, of course, and it's the right arm to chapkeni, does embrace me. Viminoi, the pasuk says, Viminoi, Hashem's right embraces me, which is kirvas aliki mamish b'esaseis milifnim, which is a closeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with greater intensity and more than the norm, especially when it becomes evident that closeness, the way it manifests in a particular chesed, because this chesed is not only the bracha, it has a root. The root is the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the right of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the midas, chesed, gvura, tiferes. This is the right. Midah in chesed would be the right. Gvura on the left. Again, we know how the midas is set up in Zaire itself. So this is the right side of HaKadosh Baruch Hu embracing me. And that's a kirva, that's a closeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And v'kol ha'korev el Hashem b'yesaseis v'hag b'lemayla mayla tzorech yisrael shofar ruach lamata mata k'misha kosav mirochek Hashem nirali. Translated, that whoever's closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with greater intensity and, so to say, the uplifted experience as a result of Hashem's closeness has to be more and more humble, and to find himself more mato, lower, as we say, in other words, lower inward. Of course, we're talking about the humble approach, which means lower and lower within myself. As the pasuk says, from distance Hashem nirali. So the simple meaning that even mirochek Hashem nirali, that Hashem finds somebody even in the person who's distance, Hashem appears to the person to want to bring him back. Again, there's different translation of this pasuk, but that would be the simple translation. But Rebbe touches over here, if Hashem nirali, if Hashem appears to me and Hashem shows me His great kindness, I feel more rochek, I feel more distance, because I'm becoming more and more humble, going, so to say, downwards within myself. And Kenoida. So we'll stop over here with the text, but the idea is that, as an example, when one, again, a healthy person with a healthy approach to life, or generally healthily thinking and appreciating matters in a proper manner, understands that, as an example, when I'm not in the face of the king, when I'm not in the face of greatness, so I could be myself, perhaps even with my follies, try to do better, and work actively, if it's in the context of Avodas Hashem, to do more, to learn more Torah, do more mitzvahs. But it's a lot about me in the center, trying to do good things. We notice when someone comes in front of a tzaddik, that, so to say, comes crumbling down. My whole me, my whole self shrinks almost to nothing. If any had to be experienced going in front of a true tzaddik, there's nothing kind of you remains. In the extent that you feel that you need, even after a moment, to leave that presence, because it's overwhelming. But the tzaddik, which sees, actually, especially a tzaddik, which is able to, famously, actually, a word from Reb Hillel, mentioning Reb Hillel says, you stand in front of a tzaddik, he looks at you, he sees your entire past, your present, and he sees your entire future in a second. Think about it. You're standing in front of that tzaddik. It's like there's no me anymore, because you're standing in front of greatness. So the whole me, so to say, even the accomplishing me, and even the spiritually accomplishing me, eventually shrinks to almost nothingness, because you're standing in front of an Ein Sof dynamic. So if somebody has a foolish approach, it's, finally, someone could see my accomplishments. Someone can appreciate my accomplishments. But it's a foolish approach. Because when you're in front of essentially true greatness, and you appreciate and understand that this is a different dynamic. It's not just a quantitative difference. It's a qualitative difference by far. So when I'm not in the physical presence, of course, I recognize myself, even in proper recognition. I learn Torah, and again, there itself a person has to look to do things with greater humility, and not chas v'shalom ever to be pompous, even on his great accomplishments in the area of Torah, mitzvahs, and everything else. A person has to be constant kol gei sheita, like it says. It's a foolishness. The famous Gemara, hey seita, daf hey amud aleph, a whole amud. The miktzas is already even the bit of haughtiness. Hashem says, I can't even be next to you. The says Hashem, I cannot live in the same domain as somebody who is pompous. There's a famous Reb Nachman, he says even a small bit is too much. And again, with the Biyurim, with explained in the Sifri Musan and so on. So even in Avodas Hashem, a person has to make sure that he's always stands in humble, but nonetheless, there's someone has self-recognition one way or another, because in your accomplishing all these important, godly, sacred accomplishments. But when you come close to true greatness, there's nothing of that really remains. If you're just a healthy, your whole demeanor is a healthy demeanor. You're coming closer to greatness. Not that you start taking it in the opposite. Oh, finally, greatness is appreciating my greatness. The opposite. You shrink to almost a state of nothing. The true state of bittul b'mitzias would be the terminology in Chassidus. And of course, I don't want to say like when Hashem appears to somebody, because the truth of the matter, the tzaddik represents the godly reality. He's meant to. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was part of the whole modus operandi of Matan Torah. Hashem says, Moshe Rabbeinu is part of the whole image of what I want via the Torah that I'm giving you. You can never separate Moshe Rabbeinu from Torah, from the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Yid in particular, and the grand plan of HaKadosh making Hashem desiring this dira b'tachtenim, this dwelling place, this abode for himself in this very physical world. Moshe being a part and parcel of this whole experience, this whole plan, this whole strategy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So the tzaddik is really the one who represents the kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when a person sees that HaKadosh Baruch Hu extending to him a kindness of an enormous measures, unusual, the person can't even make a mistake. You can't camouflage, this just happened because I met this person coincidentally. No, the person sees this is out of the ordinary. This is a bracha which I cannot put my finger to it, and it just falls upon me. That is not just a bracha about that material comfort what Hashem is giving you, and increasing your pleasures and your joy and of the result of the bracha, which Hashem really wants. In the end of the day, every Yid should smile. B'ni b'chei Yisrael, we are dear children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the question is, when a Yid is in Golus, when a Yid is suffering pain, any type of individual pain or a collective pain, that's where there is a true question, and we need somewhat to figure things out one way or another. But the default Hashem wants to give is our famous Lashon of the Alter Rebbe in this 22nd chapter we get as a Kodesh. Of course, we didn't learn it. We're holding the second, but you can tap into it. Hashem wants to give kol tov v'lomim. Hashem wants to give everything. Again, he has it later also in 25th. But Hashem wants to give everything kol tov v'lomim to every Yid. We are His children. So he wants it because Hashem wants us to be b'simcha. He wants us to rejoice. He wants us to be happy. Like a father wants his child to be happy. And a person sees that Hashem extended this great blessing to him. And of course it contributes to his joy. It contributes to his alleviation of any difficulty. If it's parnasa or it's anything which comprises the package of and contributes to the package of life, you should not only look at it the fact that here is the bracha and I'm able to appreciate the bracha and have the experience, the result of that blessing. the alleviation or the joy, the elation, but look at where the bracha is coming from. It's, in the end of the day, a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the yamin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the embrace of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Imagine that the tzaddik would embrace you. You would really lose it, in a sense, completely, because you have the godly, the representation of the Ein Sof, and through the Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the Kibbutz Torah Messina. He's embracing you. You don't think about yourself. There's nothing of yourself, so to say, remaining. In this case, when Hashem extends His kindness, it's not only don't focus just on the gift itself, focus where it's coming from. It's the yamin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the right hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, embracing you. And of course, that is not a reason, or that should not, by all manners of thought and composure of a healthy human being, to bring anything of more and more self-recognition. Hashem, you're getting it right. I deserve so much, and thank you for finally getting to my portfolio and extending yourself. No, the opposite is so true. Whoever feels that, understands and appreciates that this is Kiruv Asalikim Mamash. Hashem is becoming really close to you. Hashem is embracing you. And as such, how does it reflect? Of course it reflects with more and more humility, shval ruach, the bittul, self-nullification to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which in essence one could have, is meant to have on a constant basis. We mentioned in the last chapter, is the virtue of davening. A person stands face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why davening, particularly the climactic part of davening, the Amidah, you ever notice in Amidah in a shul, you can't even hear anything. Because everybody stands with a certain an overt image of self-nullification, because throughout the, navigating, these different steps of davening, mentioned based on what it says in Exile, the 4 steps of the 4 steps of the ladder that a person enters into davening through, the Psukei Zimra, Birchas Krishma, and that's meant to arouse, or the person should be able to sense the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he comes, or Bechlal, Hashem Echad, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when he comes to the Amidah, he's Baruch Atah, now he's standing face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How does the person stand particularly and precisely in that time, in that opportunity, when he recites the Amidah? With a complete standstill. And again, the way it's expressed in halacha, you're not allowed making any gesture, doing anything, because right now you're standing face to face with Hashem. And when someone stands face to face with a king, you have to be very careful. And this is the basis of these halachas pertaining to the Amidah, the Shemoneh Esrei. Because right now you're saying Baruch Atah, you're standing face to face with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're always standing face to face with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but not necessarily in our conscious mind. That's the point of davening, that we can get there every single day, for that matter, 3 times a day. And what does it cause? It causes the self, the total self, the nullification of self, total submission, total subjugation. It's about you. I'm not even moving. Like we explained we mentioned a number of times, like a servant in front of his master. So this is really meant to be experienced every single day. However, when somebody experiences an overt kiruv asalikim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes his yamin, his chesed, and embraces the yid, embraces the human being, embraces the yid. He feels that kurva. Of course, that's supposed to bring out the greatest shval ruach-ness, if you will, that humbleness, humility, the total subjugation of self. Ma'id, as the Alter Rebbe said. Tzorich shval ruach l'mato mato. Before I believe this, shval ruach ma'id mirochik, because it's nearly Hashem appears to me, extended His abundance of kindness.